Hey everybody, and welcome to another video. Tonight we are here to look at my reading for the month of June. So it has been a mix of a bag, I think, in the month of June. I feel like there's nothing memorable about my reading in the month of June, but maybe when we'll be looking back at it now, it'll turn out not to be as bad as it as it appeared in my memory. But I definitely feel like we were on a high in May, got so much reading done, was one of the most reading-wise productive months I've had, and then June was just like, you know, the retribution for that, I guess. I definitely didn't feel like reading most of the time. Physical reading was definitely out of the picture, and I was just not having an amazing time with most of the things that I picked up throughout the month. So yeah, let's have a look at them, okay? So that also means, statistically speaking, I only read 6 books in the month of June, okay? Yeah, that's just what we're rolling with here, which is nice because that actually means that this video might actually for once turn out to be somewhat decent in length. So, the first thing that I ended up reading was The Burnout by Sophie Kinsella, which is a book about a woman who I guess has a burnout. Honestly speaking, it's already a little bit vague to me. I will need to read the synopsis to actually remember what this book was. I can already tell you it wasn't an amazing read because I only gave it 2.5 points, 2.5 stars. Oh yeah, okay, remember this book now. So basically, our protagonist is called Sasha, and she is, I don't actually know why it says here that she's desperate, but in any case, for reasons, she decides to go and take a break in a resort that she used to go to as a child at the coast of Devon. However, when she arrives there, this coastal town and this hotel appears to be very different from her memories. You know, this hotel used to be like a luxury resort that they would never have been able to afford going to, and so she is dealing with a little bit of a burnout and wants to rekindle her spirits over there, and so her mother has kind of pushed her to go to this particular resort. However, the resort is very much looking disheveled. The people who are running there are at least eccentric, and most annoyingly to her, there's this fellow guest at the hotel who she basically had a not nice interaction with on the train over there. And of course, these two are going to be pushed in each other's vicinity quite frequently throughout her time there. Now, first of all, I couldn't deal with the dislike between these two characters, because the dislike between these two characters is basically based on nothing, you know. Like, he has a little bit of a short interaction with a child on a train, and she gets to all of these conclusions based on that one interaction that she saw him have, and she's immediately like, oh, what an asshole, blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, okay, you saw him do one shitty thing, and okay, it's a shitty thing towards a child, but also, like, you know, it's not like he, I don't know, pushed her down the stairs or anything like that, you know. He was just short with her at some point, and you know, she is like so judgmental about him over that, and then he also is quite annoyed with her because he has all of these ideas about who she is, about her being fake and her being condescending towards him and stuff like that. But so there's a lot of miscommunication, misjudgment within this book, which tends to happen in the genre, but okay, fine. And so yeah, there were a lot of things about this book that kind of annoyed me, and I don't fully remember all of them. I don't fully remember whether this is the character where, I think this is the character who also is unable to work herself out of certain situations. You know, she's not telling the full truth in certain times, and that lands her into certain situations. Yeah, this is the character. Yeah. Memory's coming back, okay? So she is there and her mother has basically already phoned ahead to the reception to indicate to the people who are running the hotel that she is like a health freak and that she wants like all the super healthy stuff that, you know, has no taste. And she is like unable to go against that. You know, she could have just from the beginning kind of indicated like, look, you know, it's kind of my intention, but I don't know how long I'll be able to hold on to it. You know, that would have been an easy way out, you know, to just be like, to just indicate that it's something she's willing to give a try, but she just doesn't really know how long she's really able to hold it up. But no, she cannot, and so she has to go behind people's back trying to score normal food because she's so sick and tired of having the healthy food that people are forcing her to eat, or at least that's how she makes it appear, you know, as if they're all forcing her to eat this food. And there are multiple situations where she is just like unable to just communicate that, you know, what people assume is what she wants to do is not what she wants to do, and just like that get out of it. But she's unable to do so for some reason or another. So I found that quite annoying as well. So it's not a bad book, but it also had a lot of things that frustrated me about it. And so as a consequence, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, it was okay, basically. Next up I read Eleanor, a 200-mile walk in search of England's lost queen by Alice Loxton. This is a non-fiction, and this is a non-fiction about a queen of England who was called Eleanor. I believe this is like 12th century or something like that. And this is basically a history non-fiction, which is looking at the life of Eleanor and the impact that she had on English society, the things that she did throughout her life, but also at the changing times of England over the past century. So our author is basically recreating a funeral march that took place when Eleanor passed away, and that went from the place that she passed away in to London. So it's a 200-mile walk, and along the way she'll walk us through the life of Eleanor, but also through the life of these towns, the crafts that certain of these towns were very known for, the changes that have happened to some of these places, the changes to geography as well, for example. And she'll also be talking about these 12 memorial crosses that were made to commemorate this walk. I really enjoyed this mix of history and sort of like travel descriptions as well. I liked how it was focused around the life of this queen that I hadn't really heard anything about, and how we get to know a lot about the queen, but also how we're not restricting ourselves to the life of this queen in describing the places that she passes along on her pilgrimage, and how we also get a little bit of a look at the pilgrimage and the circumstances of her walk, and, you know, the physical you know, like struggles of going on a 200-mile pilgrimage. So I enjoyed the overall tone of this one a lot. I also really liked the insight into Queen Eleanor, who definitely was one of these bad bitches of, you know, the history of our world. Next up, I read The Man Who Died 7 Times by Yasuhiko Nishizawa. This is basically a detective novel, which is something that I don't tend to read, right? But it's also a time loop novel, which is a trope that I absolutely adore. So basically we have our protagonist, who's this young boy who basically is spending some time, I think it's around the new year, I think. Yeah, it's just after the new year. So he's spending the new year at his grandfather's place. His grandfather basically every year invites like his extended family over to spend this period with him, and then every year he kind of updates his will and lets them know who's the person in running for taking over his company, I believe. And so our protagonist, Yoshiko, I think his name is, and so our protagonist, Yoshiko, basically has this superpower, we could say, but it's not really a power, it's more sort of like a condition, where occasionally he gets stuck into a time loop where the same day will happen, I think, 8 times, but I'm not entirely sure. And so I say that's more of a condition because he doesn't really have control over it. However, this time that he spends at his grandfather's house will spark a new loop, and his grandfather will be dying in part of that loop. So yeah, I enjoyed it to some sense. I enjoyed the concept behind it, and I appreciated the way that it resolved itself in the final sort of like iteration of this loop. But I will say that it's told in a very cold and detached style, which is pretty familiar to me, for having read quite a fair bit of Japanese translations. So it is definitely something that I see quite often with Japanese translations, is that it feels quite bare bones, just like narrating the facts and not really putting much emotion in there, or not really highlighting the emotion or putting emotion in the writing in any case. And that is definitely the case here as well. And sometimes that's to its detriment. Sometimes it does kind of work because it does, it has a certain power to it to just show the events as they're taking place. But I definitely feel like that in a time loop can kind of, I don't know, nullify or diminish the seriousness of what is happening by just like narrating the facts as if you're talking about nothing serious, whereas you are talking about the death of the grandfather, and actually about the grandfather being murdered multiple times. So it was okay. I gave it 3 stars, a little bit more than I gave to the Burnout, but it still wasn't like amazing. But it's also a genre that I don't really like, so I don't really care about detective novels in general. So maybe for a reader who does like detective novels, this could be a lot more interesting. The time loop element definitely made it interesting enough for me, but it probably wasn't enough to save me from the detective curse. Next I read The Empusium by Olga Tokarczuk, which should be lying here, but it's not. Oh, there it is. Oh. So, The Empusium, a health resort horror story by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a reimagining of The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. So we see a group of young men who basically are spending time in a sanatorium in the Swiss Alps for various reasons. A lot of them are weak from tuberculosis, I think is the illness that a lot of them suffer from, and they are spending their time over there philosophizing over life, nature, the meaning of life, purpose, and all of those types of things. It is very much a men's novel, however there is a role for women in it as well, and there is a queer element to this story as well. I was pleasantly surprised by it in the end, though I will definitely say that I was not always as invested when it came to the, you know, day-to-day observations of these men, and until we got to the final resolution I was kind of meh about the whole thing, but then I did quite enjoy figuring out like what's had actually been going on, and yeah, this book has some sort of like dark atmosphere and dark history as well, involving like wax dolls, I think, that were made for men's entertainment and that are like hidden around the town. I think there was something like that, and I've already kind of forgotten because I kind of wanted to forget about that part of the story. But there is this big sense of being watched throughout this book, and it says that it's a horror story, but I would definitely say it's more sort of a unsettling novel, and there's more the suggestion of something being there, of a horror element being there, and there's not actually a horror element that will come into play. And then actually the only 2 other things that I finished in the month of June are The House Witch Book 2 and The House Witch Book 3. So The House Witch is a series that I started earlier this year, I want to say, or maybe it's already last year, but in any case, I read the first book of The House Witch, which is a cozy fantasy in which we're looking at a witch who basically has had a dark childhood because he basically was raised by an abusive father. At a certain point in time, he finally managed to step up to his father, expel him from the house, and come into his own power, because it turned out that he is actually a house witch, which is a witch who basically uses their power around the house, and their main power actually comes from defending their house and from making the house safe for the people who call it their home. His father was very much a purist when it came to witches' powers, where he very much believed in like pure elemental powers and looked down upon witches that have a sort of like mixed power, like his son, who is a house witch. Now, in general, witches are very much looked down upon, and so when our protagonist moves into the castle to work there as a cook, he's basically hiding his power from the people around him. However, he is the type of character who gets embroiled into everything. He's a type of character who wants to be left alone and who wants nothing to do with others. However, somehow he gets mixed up into all the things that are happening around him, and so he will clash with a lot of people throughout this book, but a lot of people will also come to love him dearly throughout the book as well. I very much enjoyed this series. I very much enjoyed mainly the first one. The second one definitely was also really, really good. I definitely had a good time with that, and I feel like the third one just kind of let me down. And I think that that is an evolution that happens quite frequently with cozy fantasy if you make it a series, in the sense that stakes tend to rise in a series, and I'm sure that there must be examples out there where it's not the case, but definitely it isn't the first time that I've felt this way. Maybe not, maybe I don't have many book examples, maybe it's more like in TV shows or something like that, but what starts off as a nice sort of like simple story of this cook who goes into the castle to just live his life there as a simple cook and just like make amazing food for people, and who has this knack for attracting attention and for, you know, being the center of attention even though he's trying to avoid attention. That type of story definitely evolves as you get through a trilogy, and as his story needs to evolve with him, or as there is this apparent need to do that, and so stakes definitely rise. I feel like in the second book still managed to very much closely adhere to the things that I really enjoyed about the first book. Mainly the things that I really enjoyed about the first and the second book are these examples of our protagonist just like true being himself, creating like the perfect solutions to complex problems, you know, like there are these problems that people, he gets involved into these situations where people are just like, oh no, oh my god, this is gonna, like, he's gonna be beaten up or whatever, but then somehow by the end of it everybody's hugging and expressing their feelings like they've never done before, you know, like this is the type of influence that this character has on the people around him, and I really enjoyed seeing that in the first and in the second book, and the third book definitely is a culmination of all of the pieces that have been building throughout the first two books, and as a consequence it is not stake free. As a consequence there are a lot of stakes, and there's a lot less of us just watching our protagonist in semi-innocent situations like get his way out of them. So I did still enjoy the third book, but it just wasn't anything that, you know, like really appealed to me. It wasn't feeding the things that I most loved about the first two books, and as a consequence I was more sort of like going along with the flow and letting myself be led along by the flow, rather than actively wanting to push through the books and wanting to see what was coming next. So an unfortunate conclusion to the series for me, but I definitely had a really good time, especially with the first two. And so yeah, that's all the reading I got done in the month of June. As you will have noticed, there was only one physical book that I finished in the month of June, and so yeah, that wasn't too great when it came to my TBR. I'm not entirely sure. I will have a visual over here with my stats about the beginning of the month and the end of the month. I assume the conclusion is that I ended up with 26 books on the TBR, which I feel like is a number that has been there for a while. Like it's either 26 or 27 or 28. Like I feel like those numbers are constantly looking back at me when I'm checking the number of my TBR. Maybe not always at the end of the month for you guys, but definitely whenever I'm checking my stats, I'm like, how am I still at 26? But so yes, let me know how your June went, and I'm definitely making a comeback in July thus far, and so I'm happy to report that I'm now currently ahead of the 100 pages a day pace, because definitely last month I didn't get to the 100 pages a day pace at all. I was very much shy of that, so yeah, happy that in July at least the reading machine has started again. I still am not really up to a lot of physical reading, but I have read 2 books with the eyeballs. I read one and I'm reading another one now with the eyeballs that are really working very well for me. I tried another one and I had to DNF. So I think I just need to be very clear, especially when it comes to physical reading, in analyzing why something is not working for me, like why am I struggling to physically read it, and maybe it isn't about me struggling to physically read right now, maybe it was just me reading books that didn't excite me enough to, you know, physically push through. I think definitely there are cases where I'm struggling physically, where I could have a much better time with them in an audiobook format, but maybe for some cases it's also just like, just don't continue. This is just not the book for you. And I hope to hang on to that knowledge for a little bit further, because a lot of times I'm like, no, I want to give it its full fair shot, but who is that serving ultimately, right? But so yeah, let me know what you've been reading in June and what your favorite book has been for the month of June. And with that, I'm gonna leave you guys and hope to see you for the next video, and bye!